Hi folks, HR Funk here. With a rifle that I am really looking forward to working with and telling you all about, what I have here is a Bergara B14R bolt action rifle chambered for the 22 rimfire cartridge. And Bergara considers the B14R to be a trainer. Reason being, it is patterned after their own larger centerfire rifles as well as the very popular Remington Model 700. Now, many of you know that I am a longtime Remington Model 700 driver, and I'm a former SWAT team sniper, and I use the Remington Model 700 professionally. And I have seen some reviews of the B14R by other folks on YouTube, and generally it's either reviewed for its use in 22 rimfire competitions, or it's reviewed for its use as a trainer for folks who fire their full-size centerfire rifles in some sort of competition, and they use the B14R as a subcaliber trainer. What I have not seen is anyone who uses either the centerfire cartridge Bergara rifles or the Remington Model 700 professionally review the B14R for use as a subcaliber trainer to help maintain their skills for that purpose. So I'm going to be doing that very thing in this video, and hopefully by the time I get done, I'll be able to tell you whether or not I think this is a good option for a professional shooter to be able to use to help maintain those skills. So here we go. Before we get into this review, there's a couple of things that I want to say more or less to lay some ground rules. First of all, this is going to be my first experience ever with a Bergara rifle of any kind. I've never fired one of their centerfire rifles, and I've never before fired one of their rimfire rifles. But, as I said, I do have extensive professional experience with the Remington Model 700, so I'm going to be evaluating the B14R for its ability to replicate the Remington Model 700 and to be analogous to that platform. I'm not ignoring the fact that this rifle also replicates the large centerfire Bergara rifles, but I just don't have any frame of reference for making that comparison. Also, I want to say, if you are a professional user of any rifle, the best rifle to train with is the one that you are issued. Obviously, that's the one with which you have to be most proficient, but I also recognize the fact that for various reasons, it's not always possible to train constantly when you might want to with your work rifle, and sometimes you might be able to use a subcaliber trainer for that purpose. And if it does in fact replicate the feel and form and function of your work rifle, there should be some training benefit there, even though you're not firing the actual cartridge that you would be using if you were working. Lastly, I want to mention that this topic is of particular interest to me because about 20 years ago, I tried to do this exact same thing. I selected a 22 caliber bolt action rifle that I hoped was going to more or less replicate the feel and function of my work rifle, and I was hoping to use that as a subcaliber trainer. And the outcome of that effort was not altogether successful. In fact, I probably should say it was not successful. Not that the rifle that I picked wasn't a good rifle. In fact, it was a very nice rifle and it shot very well, but it was just so different from my work rifle. I never really felt that I got the training benefit from it that I hoped that I was going to get when I selected it in the first place. So I'll be very interested to see at the end of this video whether or not I think the B14R has succeeded in that effort where I failed all those years ago. We'll start this up-close look at the Bergara B14R the way you bring it home with you from the store, which is in the box. But before I even open the box, I want to tell you about the different versions of this rifle that are available because there's a lot of them. First off, there are two basic variants of the B14R. The one that's inside the box here has the steel barrel, which I'll show you here momentarily. There's also a version that's available with a carbon fiber wrapped barrel that's about a pound lighter than this one you're going to see. Also, both the steel version and the carbon fiber version come in different chamberings. This is the 22 long rifle version. These rifles are also available in 17 HMR and 22 Winchester Magnum. And if you prefer, you can get just the barreled action rather than purchasing the entire rifle with the stock, and that way if you have your own stock that you want to use, you don't have to purchase the stock for no reason whatsoever. The rifles are available in both right hand and left hand versions, but only in the 22 rimfire chambering, but you can get them without the stock in both the right hand and left hand version, once again for 22 rimfire only. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's open the box and see what's inside. And when you first open the box with your B14R, and for some reason the box is not wanting to cooperate here, so I'm going to have to hold it, you get an owner's manual, not surprisingly. We have the rifle itself, the bolt, and I'm going to give you a close-up look at all of these items. A 10-round magazine, and a sticker from Bergara that you can put wherever you want to put a sticker. Now, let me get the box and packaging out of the way, and we'll start to look at the rifle itself. Here is a look at the receiver of the B14R, and if you're familiar with the receiver on a Remington 700, you're probably already seeing some similarities here. Now, obviously, the opening for insertion and ejection of the cartridge is smaller for the rimfire cartridges than it would be for centerfire cartridges. But otherwise, this looks very, very familiar to me. Starting at the back and moving forward, the receiver tang looks identical to what I would expect to see on a Remington 700. Also, the hole spacing for the scope base is identical to a short action Remington 700. So whatever scope base or scope mount you use on your issued rifle, you would be able to use that same exact hardware on this rimfire trainer, and that would give you the same optic, the same sight picture, etc. on your rimfire trainer that you have on your issued rifle at work. I like that a lot, and that's one of the things when I tried to put together that rimfire rifle years ago that was different. I had to use different rings, different base, and a different optic, so it never had exactly the same look when I was getting my sight picture in my rimfire rifle that I was able to get with that professional rifle, and I very, very much like the pattern of this Bergara B14R receiver. The similarities between the B14R receiver and the Remington Model 700 receiver are more than just cosmetic and go beyond the hole spacing for the optic, etc., because the receiver of the B14R is actually built on the same pattern as the short action Remington Model 700 receiver. What that means is by simply removing the stock bolts and pulling out the barreled action, you can put this B14R action into any stock that would fit a short action Remington Model 700. So now not only can the shooter have the same exact optic, the same mounting hardware, etc., but they can also have the exact same stock on the rimfire trainer that they're using on their rifle at work. So this allows them to have the exact same cheek piece height, the exact same pistol grip, the exact same overall feel, etc. on this training rifle that they would have on their rifle that they're using professionally. Lastly, since the B14R is built on the same pattern of the Remington Model 700 receiver, any trigger that will fit a Remington Model 700 will also fit the B14R. So now our professional user has the ability to replicate the optic, the stock, and the trigger of their work rifle in a rimfire trainer. This addresses a lot of the issues, not all of them, but a lot of the issues I had with that rifle that I tried to put together years ago, because it was just so different when I was shooting it as opposed to shooting my work rifle that there was just not that much correlation there that could carry over beyond just basic marksmanship. The 22 rimfire version of the B14R is fitted with an 18-inch chrome moly barrel that has a number 6 taper, and I specified the 22 rimfire version because both the 17 HMR and the 22 Magnum versions of this rifle have 20-inch barrels. The B14R has a button-rifled bore with a 1:16-inch rifling twist ratio. Also, as you can see here, it has a target crown. It also has a threaded muzzle for the attachment of different types of muzzle devices, and it comes from the factory with a thread protector installed. As much as I'm looking forward to seeing what type of accuracy I can get from this barrel of the B14R, I've got to say this is one place where, at least for me personally, this rifle loses some of its correlation to the Remington Model 700. Reason being, my old work rifle has a 24-inch barrel, and the rifle that I shoot most often nowadays, my Model 700 HRF, has a 26-inch barrel. So the short 18-inch barrel on the B14R really changes the balance and overall heft of this rifle as opposed to either one of those. I would have preferred to see an option for the B14R with a longer barrel, something like a 22 or a 24-inch barrel, and had that been available, that would have been my preference for that very reason, so that it continues to replicate that feel of my larger centerfire Model 700 rifles. That said, a lot of people aren't going to notice that, and anyone who uses a Model 700 with a shorter barrel, something like a 20-inch or an 18-inch version of the Model 700, is going to like this just fine. Moving on to the bolt of the B14R, this is an interesting design, beginning with this floating bolt head, and we can see it has dual extractors, so we'll see how the extractor function works when we get out to the range. It also has dual opposing locking lugs, just like a full-size centerfire rifle, although as you can see they are much farther back on the bolt than they would be on a Remington Model 700, where they'd be out here at the front. If you look at the cocking piece and the general design at the rear of the bolt, this is very, very similar to a Remington 700 if you're familiar with that. In fact, it's almost identical. I guess that's not surprising, considering the B14R can use the exact same triggers, so the bolt itself is very, very similar to that of a Model 700. It does have the large weighted bolt handle, and I don't think this is removable. If it is, it's on there tight enough that I can't get it off, so this is the bolt handle you're going to end up using. At the rear, we can see that there is a, if I can get this in focus, because for some reason, there we go. There is a cocking indicator right there. When you see the red on the top of the indicator, the action is cocked. If that's forward and you can't see it, then obviously the action is not cocked. Here, as you can see, I've installed the bolt in the receiver of the B14R because I want to point out another area where I wish the engineers at Bergara had taken just a little bit more time and put a little bit more thought into this, because overall they did such a good job replicating the feel and form and function of the Remington Model 700, but in this area it falls a little bit short, and short is the optimum word, because if we look at the length of the bolt travel here, it is much shorter than we would have with a full-size centerfire cartridge like a 308 Winchester or 6.5 Creedmoor or what have you. And just like Ruger did with their Ruger Precision Rimfire, where they allowed the bolt to come farther to the rear to replicate that full bolt travel that you would have associated with those centerfire cartridges, I wish Bergara had done something similar to that with the B14R. Something to be mindful of is that the action of the B14R should not be dry fired. Now, there was nothing in the owner's manual that addressed that, and I could not find anything on the website, but I did call Bergara's customer service and ask specifically about that, and I was told no, the action should only be fired with ammunition in the chamber or with a snap cap in the chamber, but it should not be dry fired because that can cause damage to the firing pin. Because of that recommendation against dry firing the B14R, I'm not going to be weighing the trigger of this rifle, but I did want to mention that the trigger is adjustable. In order to adjust it, the action has to be removed from the stock, and there is an adjustment screw on the bottom of the trigger housing that allows it to be adjusted, according to Bergara, between 2.5 pounds and 4.5 pounds. Also, from this view, we can see the bolt release here on the side of the receiver. This is another area where this rifle differs from the Remington Model 700. Many of you know that the bolt release for the 700 is at the top inside the trigger guard. In order to remove the bolt, simply lift the handle, move it to the rear, and depress the bolt release, and it can be removed from the receiver. Probably not surprisingly is the fact that since the trigger is identical to the Remington Model 700, the safety operates in exactly the same manner. When the safety is moved to the rear, it is in the safe position, and when it's moved forward by the red dot that you see right there, it is in the fire position. Let's take a look at the stock of the B14R. This is what Bergara calls their HMR stock, which is their hunting and match rifle stock, and it has a lot of very nice features of its own, beginning with the fact it is a synthetic stock, so it's impervious to the elements. It's not going to be affected by temperature, moisture, humidity, etc. It free floats this barrel, and the free float is very generous. To help facilitate that free float, as well as to provide a solid bedding for the receiver of the B14R, embedded inside the HMR stock is an aluminum mini chassis system. Along with the QD sling attachment points that I just mentioned, there are also standard sling swivel studs that you see here. There are two on the bottom of the front of the stock for the attachment of a sling or a bipod or what have you. There is a third stud on the bottom of the rear of the buttstock. I would kind of like to see an M-lock attachment slot here because I think nowadays there are more M-lock attachment type bipods than there are sling swivel stud attachment bipods. Again, that is a personal preference on my part, and I'm sure I'm going to be able to find a bipod that's going to work just fine with these standard swivel studs. Here's a look at the pistol grip of the HMR stock. And this positions the shooter's hand at not quite a 90-degree angle to the trigger, but a very comfortable angle. And I have no problem getting the proper trigger finger placement with that pistol grip. And I'll get a better idea of what I think of that when I actually start to shoot this rifle out at the range. The buttstock of the HMR has several different features to allow it to be customized to the shooter's preference. The first is an adjustable comb. And by loosening this stock bolt, we can raise the comb so the shooter is able to get the proper eye position behind the optic that's being used. Also, it is adjustable for length of pull by adding or removing these spacers that you see right here. And one nice thing about this design is you do not have to completely remove the recoil pad in order to be able to remove the spacers. You just loosen this slightly and they will come out to the side and you can remove them without taking everything all apart. The recoil pad itself is very large and soft. Not that I'm going to be worried about the massive recoil of the 22 rimfire cartridge, but this does help to adhere this portion of the recoil pad to the shooter's shoulder, and this is a very grippy, almost sticky rubber compound that I think is going to work very well. Finally, we see this relief cut on the bottom of the stock, and this can be used either for a rear bag to support the rifle during firing, or if there's no rear bag available, the shooter can use their support hand to pull the stock back tight into their shoulder in order to get a solid firing position. For its magazine, the B14R uses a AICS pattern magazine. Now this is a 10-shot magazine for the 22 rimfire cartridge, but in size and feel and shape and function, it is very similar to the AICS magazines used by a lot of the popular stocks that are on the Remington Model 700 rifles. So this once again is going to help with simulating that feel of the full-size, full-caliber rifles, even though you're still using the rimfire trainer. This is another one of those things that I have not used before, and I'll be looking forward to seeing just how it works when we get out to the range. In my handling of the B14R, I have noted that its weight is fairly substantial, and I'm going to try to balance it on my scale. It's coming in at just over 9 pounds, about 9¼ pounds, and if we add the unloaded magazine to it, that brings it up to almost 9½ pounds. Now this is before optics, bipods, etc., etc., etc. So there is a little bit of weight here. If you're concerned about weight, you might be more interested in the carbon fiber version. As I said at the very beginning of the video, that cuts about a pound off the weight from the steel version that we see here. For its overall length, the B14R comes in at 38 inches. That's going to do it for part 1 of my review and evaluation of the Bergara B14R. In part 2, we're going to head off to the range and see how this rifle performs. Now before I go out there, I'm going to mount a scope to it and get everything else ready, so by the time I arrive, I can continue my assessment, and hopefully by the end of that video, I can tell you whether or not I think the B14R is a good subcaliber training rifle for the professional shooter. Until then, if you have any questions or comments about this video, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, stop by my website, hrfunk.com, check out the news and information page to see all the latest things going on with me and the channel, and go by the products page because a lot of the products I've reviewed have links to the manufacturers on that page. And if you look underneath some of those links, there's some information that'll save you some money if you decide to make a purchase. See you next time, folks. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.